Today's gospel tells us that we should not fear those who persecute us. After all, they can only destroy the body. They cannot destroy the soul. God wants to remind us that He knows everything that we are confronted with, and that we have nothing to fear so long as we stay close to Him. And the reason we will be safeguarded when we stay close to Him is that His guidance and love will protect our soul. This should give us much comfort, particularly in a time like the last few months. I think it's safe to say that the words from Jeremiah this morning, terror on every side, resonates with most of us. Every direction we turn, there is something that can terrify. Personally, I found the pandemic to be plenty for us to grapple with in 2020. But instead, now we have to even grapple with far more, with issues of excessive police violence, concerns about racism, and those who let their anger turn to violence and looting. And so it's no surprise that many of us can feel afraid. And it is my fervent desire that we embrace today's gospel message, that we need not be afraid of any of these things. God will protect our souls. But I think it's worth reflecting on the consequences of letting fear dominate our lives. At some level, it's obvious to all of us why we should avoid fear. Fear is a horrible feeling. It sticks in our gut. Nobody wants to feel afraid. But I think focusing on the feeling of fear can cause us to forget how fear can become incarnational. One of the tenets of our Christian faith is that the spiritual can come into the physical world. This is what the word incarnate means, to become physical. And so Christ, who is the love of God, became incarnate. He took the spiritual nature of love and made it physical. However, and unfortunately, it is just as true that negative spirits and feelings can also become incarnational. And so fear can become incarnate. Or said another way, fear can cause us to do all sorts of horrible physical actions. So I think it would be a good idea for all of us to spend some time this week in prayer asking God to illuminate what we are afraid of. Sometimes fear can hide deep within us and cause us to act in irrational ways that surprise even us. So I think it would be wise to ask God to show us where fear is lurking inside us. And just as importantly, once it has been illuminated, to ask God to show us how that fear is manifesting itself in our lives. Said another way, we should ask God how our actions are being corrupted by our fears. Because the list of possibilities is long and diverse. When we fear what will happen if we admit the truth, we are tempted to lie. When we fear there will not be enough for our family, we are tempted to be greedy and hoard. When we fear that no one is listening to us, we are tempted to get angry. When we fear being persecuted, we are tempted to be defensive and to refuse to admit our faults. And when we fear how people will react when we stand up for justice, we are tempted to inaction. And so it bears repeating. Fear can cause us to do all sorts of horrible things. And this is why we must not give in to fear. The only way we will spread truth instead of lies is if we are not afraid. The only way we will be charitable as opposed to greedy is if we are not afraid. The only way we will have peace instead of anger is if we're not afraid. The only way we will be humble instead of defensive or prideful is if we are not afraid. And the only way we will diligently stand up for justice instead of cowering in inaction is if we are not afraid. So this issue of fear is critical not just for our eternal salvation, but also to our pragmatic mission to bring the gospel to our wounded world. And so this morning, the gospel reminds us we must double down on our commitment to not be afraid. We must prayerfully ask God to show us the fears that are lurking deep within us and pray for the strength to overcome those fears, because both our souls and the future of our world depend on it.